That's Rod Serling introducing an episode of The Twilight Zone more than half a century ago. Starting tomorrow, the show is back in an all-new series on CBS All Access.
What if I told you that one episode of The Twilight Zone was banned for over 5 decades, silenced, hidden, and completely erased from TV history? Now, after 55 long years, it's finally being shown again. But why was it banned in the first place? What made it so dangerous? And why does it matter right now more than ever? Today, we're stepping into a dimension of censorship, fear, and redemption. A true story that's stranger than fiction. Welcome to The Twilight Zone. Section 1, Entering the Zone. A show entering the zone ahead of its time. In 1964, one episode of The Twilight Zone was aired once and then vanished. It was locked away for over 55 years, left out of syndication, hidden from public view, and quietly erased from the show's legacy. Why? What was in that episode that made it too dangerous to ever show again? And why is it being brought back now, in 2025? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all began. The Twilight Zone premiered on CBS on October 2nd, 1959. And unlike anything else on television, it didn't follow a recurring cast or linear story. It was an anthology. Each week, a new tale, a new set of characters, and a new descent into the strange, the speculative, and the morally challenging. What connected them all was a quiet, unnerving voice. Rod Serling, who wrote or co-wrote 92 of the show's 156 episodes and narrated every chilling twist, starting from episode 2. His delivery was calm and clear. But behind the calm, there was always warning. The show came at a time when America was riding the highs of post-war prosperity while privately fearing nuclear annihilation, communist infiltration, and civil unrest. Serling, a World War II veteran who had seen real horror, wasn't interested in escapism. His writing pulled viewers into stories that probed fear, guilt, injustice, and the unknown. He knew people were scared, not just of aliens or monsters, but of themselves. And he used that fear not to manipulate, but to ask, what kind of world are we building? Who gets to survive in it? Who gets erased? The Cold War loomed large in many episodes. So did McCarthyism, the Red Scare, the arms race, and the haunting question of whether humanity deserved to endure. In one famous episode, Time Enough at Last, a book-loving man survives a nuclear apocalypse only to lose his glasses and be left unable to read. In the shelter, suburban friends turn against each other in minutes when faced with a nuclear threat. These weren't just cautionary tales. They were reflections of what Serling saw around him, packaged in sci-fi so they could slip past the people who would otherwise shut them down. That was the genius of The Twilight Zone. Serling used speculative fiction, stories involving time travel, aliens, robots, parallel universes as a kind of shield. He said things that couldn't be said in a straightforward drama. Network censors were more lenient if the story was set on Mars, even if it was really about racism in Alabama. Sponsors were less likely to object to a mutant child controlling a town if the real point was about authoritarianism and control. He disguised real social critiques in futuristic packaging. And for a while it worked, but not always. Serling's earlier career had been defined by frustration. In 1956, a live TV drama he wrote called Noon on Doomsday, meant to depict the death of EMTT till was censored so heavily it lost all meaning. Network executives changed the victim from a black boy in Mississippi to an anonymous foreigner. Fearing backlash from Southern affiliates and sponsors, Serling was furious. The Twilight Zone became his way of taking back control. Still, even in the relative freedom of the Twilight Zone, Serling had limits. CBS was nervous about his increasingly political tone. Ratings were never explosive, and sponsors sometimes dropped out mid-season. And then came the episode that crossed the invisible line. It was called The Encounter, aired only once in May 1964. The episode starred Neville Brand as a bitter World War II veteran and a young pre-Star Trek George T. as a Japanese-American man. The entire story takes place in one room, and the episode ends in violence. It's uncomfortable and tense, and in hindsight, brilliantly written. But at the time, CBS was flooded with complaints. Viewers called it offensive and dangerous, while Asian American groups condemned the suggestion that Take's father was a traitor. The country wasn't ready to face its own wartime actions. CBS pulled the episode from syndication. For decades, the encounter vanished from cable, DVDs, and public memory. But why now? Why, after 55 years, is this episode being allowed back into circulation? That's the story we're going to explore next. Because the answer isn't just about one TV episode. It's about history, memory, censorship, and the long fight to bring uncomfortable truths back into the light. Section 2. The Encounter. The Encounter episode they tried to bury. For over half a century, this episode was missing. Not lost, not forgotten, buried. Executives pulled it from reruns, home releases skipped over it, and even dedicated fans were left in the dark. But now, in one of the most unexpected moves in recent media history, The Encounter is back. Not a remake, not a sanitized version. The original uncut long band episode, finally re-aired in full in 2016, and now returning to wide release in 2025. How could an episode of a show like The Twilight Zone, which was built on moral discomfort and difficult truths, be too controversial even for its standards? And what exactly did this quiet 25-minute bottle episode get so right and so wrong that it was removed from circulation for 55 years? Let's start with the basics. The Encounter aired on May 1st, 1964, during the show's fifth and final season. It was one of only 4 bottle episodes ever produced by The Twilight Zone, a term used in television to describe a story that takes place entirely in one confined location with a very limited cast, typically to save on budget. But despite its minimalist setup, The Encounter delivers one of the most intense, psychologically layered, and socially explosive stories in the entire series. It opens in an attic. Neville Brand, playing a World War II veteran named Fenton, is sorting through old junk. He comes across a samurai sword clearly looted from a Japanese soldier. Moments later, a young Japanese-American man named Arthur, played by George Ta in one of his earliest TV roles, enters the attic looking for work. Fenton offers him a beer, and the two begin a conversation that at first seems casual, even friendly. But this isn't just a chat between strangers. What unfolds is a slow-motion detonation of trauma, guilt, and suppressed rage. Fenton starts reminiscing about the war, about killing Japanese soldiers, and about how he earned that sword. Arthur tries to keep the peace, but something's off. He stares at the sword a little too long. He repeats phrases with strange intensity, and then he drops the first bombshell. His real name is Taro, and his father, he says, was a spy for Imperial Japan who helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor. From here, the atmosphere tightens like a noose. Fenton becomes paranoid. He's not just haunted by what he did in the war. He begins to suspect Arthur is there for revenge. Arthur, meanwhile, grows more volatile. He suggests the sword has a spirit, that it wants blood. There's no monster, no ghost, no alien, just 2 men trapped in a room, neither willing to leave, both carrying decades of psychological warfare inside them. So why did this episode provoke such an extreme reaction? On the surface, it might seem obvious. CBS and its sponsors were worried about alienating viewers, especially Asian American audiences, by depicting Arthur's father as a traitor. This wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a central plot point. It implied that a Japanese-American man living on U.S. soil had aided in the most devastating military attack on the country in modern history. And this was being broadcast in 1964 at a time when the U.S. government had barely begun acknowledging the full scale of its own crimes against Japanese-American citizens during World War II. Over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, most of them U.S. citizens, were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in internment camps after the attack on Pearl Harbor. These were not enemy combatants. These were families, shopkeepers, children, teachers locked up because of their race. The government had justified the internment with vague claims of national security, but in reality, there was never any evidence of mass disloyalty or espionage. And in 1964, that truth had still not been fully acknowledged. To air an episode where a Japanese-American character confirms that his father was a spy, that was seen as inflammatory, even dangerous. But what the critics and censors missed, or perhaps refused to see, was that the encounter wasn't just about scapegoating. It was about complicity, about the long shadows cast by war. Fenton, the white veteran, isn't portrayed as a noble hero. He's unstable, possibly dangerous, and clearly consumed by shame. He admits that he killed an unarmed soldier, possibly in cold blood, and took the sword as a trophy. He's haunted not just by the war, but by what the war turned him into. Arthur isn't a clear-cut victim, either. His confession about his father is filled with ambiguity. Is it true? Is it something he was told as a child and came to believe? Is he confronting Fenton with a literal truth or a metaphorical one? Trying to explain what it means to grow up in a country that locked you behind barbed wire and then told you to be grateful. Even the sword, which Arthur claims carries a spirit, could be read either as a supernatural force or as a symbol of the violence passed from one generation to the next. None of this was spelled out directly, and that was the problem. The episode offered no easy answers, no moral clarity. In a time when television preferred clear heroes and villains, the encounter left everyone feeling uncomfortable, including CBS. Viewer complaints rolled in immediately. Sponsors threatened to pull support. Some claimed the episode was racist. Others said it was anti-American. Still others said it was too intense for primetime. Internally, CBS executives were panicked. The show was already on thin ice due to declining ratings and rising production costs. Rather than defend the episode or Sorling's right to push boundaries, they quietly pulled the encounter from syndication. When the Twilight Zone entered reruns, cable marathons,